Good morning, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be back for part two. When Reverend Ross said, "Can you do 2 Sundays in a row?" I was overjoyed. It always gives us an opportunity to explore something more deeply. We started last week with talking about creating a family, and it's really appropriate that we celebrate Father's Day today. And Mark has already greeted everyone and offered congratulations and best wishes and blessings to those who have fulfilled a father figure's role. We did a little adjustment of the hymn tune, not the tune, of the words. You notice that I changed the pronoun to the feminine she in the second verse, because we know that it takes both the masculine energy and the feminine energy to raise a healthy child, both physically and emotionally and intellectually. And we also know that as our society has changed over centuries, that very often any person can be called to be a father figure. And what is a father figure? Well, the next question to ask would be, so what's God? Because we so often refer to God as Father. It's not that so often we refer to God as Father. It's the foundation. It's the premise of our belief system about our relationship to God as the Father, the source of all being, the source of all that we experience, the very breath that we draw, the very beat of our heart. This something as simple as picking up this coffee cup with the contents of the coffee in it. Everything that exists in reality comes forth from that entity that we call Father. If we look to our scriptures, we see that the relationship has existed from the beginning of humanity's experience, humanity's seeking for a relationship with something greater than itself. Primitive man and woman didn't exactly know the term father, but they knew there was a power greater than themselves. It often appeared as a terrifying power. It threw lightning bolts, avalanches, volcanoes, floods, storms, and it needed to be appeased. It needed to be mollified so that it would not injure or harm them. And as human consciousness evolved from very primitive forms, we began to understand a different relationship. When we look into the Hebrew scriptures, as we also call it the Old Testament, we see that God is there, present in every possible way to the development of these people. And of course, that is an allegory for the development of our own consciousness. We move beyond, oh, it's a big scary thing and I better be good so it doesn't hurt me in any way, to, oh, there is a loving presence with whom I can have a relationship. Excuse me. And then we come into what we call the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, in which Jesus is very explicit about the kind of relationship that he has with the Father. In fact, he's somewhat ahead of his time, and he's out in front of the current words of the day. When he says, I and the Father are one, people kind of snap to attention and what? Does he think he's God? Well, that's a question for another occasion. But what he is saying is that which we perceive as God, the energy, the intelligence that governs the universe, not just governs the universe, but ideates every day. It has an idea, and it's like, if it had fingers, it would snap its fingers and it would appear. After all, that's what creation was. God said, and let there be. And the wholeness of the universe came into being. And today, that same ideation works. We have the power to say, let there be. And we end up with things like coffee cups. We end up with little gizmos like this. Even this one's very old. It still works. And new things arise every day. We live in relationship to that energy being, to that source of all good, to that source of all love. Because in unity, we do teach that it is a beneficent, loving being. There isn't an evil force out there somewhere that is constantly trying to trap us, catch us. If we have a moment amiss, and I call that amiss, I call that, I used to have a whole lot of words for it. Like today, I just like to call it being a twerp for a moment. You don't hear that word too much anymore. I think it's out of my childhood. Twerp, T-W-E-R-P. There are a lot cruder terms that we use today, which are unkind and demeaning. So when I go into my twerp behavior, I remind myself, Linda, how are you honoring that which created you in love and perfection? And then I bring into awareness what I have done, and I strive to move beyond it by changing my attitude, speaking different words. This is our process of daily life, friends. And just because it's Father's Day today isn't the only day we do this. Just because it's Father's Day today and we're talking about our relationship to God and our relationship to our human parents isn't the reason we do it. There's a catch here, though. We like to think of God. We feel best when we think of God as all loving, all kind. And then something happens, something negative. We get a phone call. We get a letter in the mail. We get a text. Someone calls us up and says, my spouse is in the hospital. He's having 3 stents put in. Someone else calls and says, the plane just crashed. And we wonder, what? What did I do wrong? And that is not the relationship that we have with God, friends. It is not that relationship that we have with God. It is not that we have done something wrong. It is that we have misperceived the unfolding process of the world. There is a joke among theologians, ministers, religion historians. It comes from Genesis 1:26, in which says, and God made man in God's image and likeness. And the punchline is, and we have returned the compliment. In other words, we have projected onto God our own shortcomings. We get angry, we get mad, we get nasty, we get torpy, we get vicious, we get vindictive. We bring forth all of those characteristics which ancient man needed to survive in that survivalist environment. And we no longer live in that survivalist environment. We live in a different world. That doesn't mean that things which we call bad don't happen. But we call them bad because we choose to. We look at them and say, that's not good. I don't like that. There's a landslide and hundreds of people are trapped and died. A plane falls from the sky and all are lost. A child gets cancer and we can't figure out why. Or something really simple. You take the eggs out of the refrigerator and they fall out of your hand on the floor. That's pretty prosaic in contrast to cancer. But friends, either way, those daily occurrences have a way of pulling us off our mark, off our goal, off our design, our intent, our purpose as spiritual beings having a human experience. That goal is creating a loving world. God created the idea and said, let it be. And as far as we know, our planet, and that's for a while, that's all we thought there was. And now we know there's a whole lot more. Let it be. And we are to be in it, on it, part of it, evolving it every day through the guidance and the wisdom of God present within us. We can pick up every book we need to. We can pick up paperbacks by the ton. We can pick up Bibles. We can pick up scriptures of other spiritual plans and seek wisdom. And yet they are helps. And yet that wisdom is within us. Why? Because there is only one power, one presence in the universe, God, the good, omnipotent, in which we live and move and have our being. I'm thinking of something that I read in one of those books. Joel Goldsmith, who was a Christian Science practitioner, people would come in to see him for counseling, and they'd start to say, my relationship, my illness, my bank account. And he would say, stop. He would say, Joe or Mary or whatever the person's name was, there isn't God and your relationship or God and your bank account or God and your apparent illness in your body. There is only God. Now let us focus on that. But that's hard to do. The very physicality of our being, friends. We are aware that we are sitting on a chair. We are aware that we are holding a cup of coffee. Thank you for that indulgence of taking a sip of it. So what do we do? What is required? Last week I quoted something for you, and I'm going to quote it again. It says, undisturbed calmness of mind is attained. And then it gives us some advice. What is undisturbed calmness of mind? I think it's what Unity calls the Christ consciousness. That we are centered in a universe whose intention is good and in which unfolding expression we participate every day. I think that's the Christ consciousness. It's our mindset. It's our attitude. Choose whatever word you want. Choose whatever word resonates with you. So what does it go on to say? It says, undisturbed calmness of mind is attained by cultivating friendliness toward the happy, compassion for the unhappy, delight in the virtuous, and indifference toward the wicked. And this was by a gentleman from the subcontinent of India, Patanjali, Patanjali. I apologize if I have mispronounced it. As I said last week, Siri doesn't tell you how to pronounce it when you ask her for information on the phone. Let's go back and look at this because that was your homework last week in case you tuned in. Cultivating friendliness toward the happy. Boy, that one's easy. You look at somebody who's happy, you're happy. They got a smile on their face, you're inclined to smile. But sometimes, folks, our shoulds and shouldn'ts get in the way of that. A dear friend the other day said to me, the only time I can take my new puppy for a training class is at 10:30 at such and such a day, and that means I'm going to have to miss a worship service. Gee, I just don't think it's right to miss a worship service for a puppy. And I said to her, what is that puppy going to bring you? It's going to bring you delight and joy. Because the piece that you don't know is that she is recently widowed. She lost her husband of more than 50 years. And this puppy brings her warmth, brings her joy. but it's being a puppy and it's biting her toes and her fingers and she needs to take it for training. And I said, I think God understands that this puppy needs to be trained so you can take delight in it. And once again, resonate with the joy of life. She ended up tuning in late and all was well. So cultivating friendliness toward the happy requires that we sometimes set aside our preconceived boundaries of what should be. Or as I like to say, it can only be like this. Ichabod. The second one was compassion for the unhappy. Compassion is an interesting word. It means to be in the same emotion with. It derives from a Latin word. However, sometimes when we see unhappy people, it's like, I think I'll keep my distance. Or we just make a grumbly remark, well, that's so-and-so. Nothing ever pleases him. Nothing ever pleases her. That's just Mr. Grumpy over there or Mrs. Grumpy over there. Friends, what's called for here is love. Why are they unhappy? Sometimes it's very evident. We see it. It's because what Shakespeare called the slings and arrows of life are very sharp and very hurtful in their life. And in that moment, we don't get into the pity party boat with them, but we step back and say, how can I be of service to this person? Can I bring a blessing? Doesn't mean you have to be obvious about it. Many years ago, I learned a trick. I don't remember the person who taught it, but he was sending them an arrow of love and light. And I thought, you gotta be kidding. How are you gonna do this? And it said, well, you just sort of reach up and, scratch the back of your head, which is taking the arrow out. And you just kind of go like that. And you've sent the arrow of love and light to someone who seems to be in dis-ease, in disorder. I'm going to stop for a moment here because I want us to recall the title of this talk. And it's One for All for One and One for All. And last week I mentioned that great book by Alexandre Dumas, The Three Musketeers. Now, to give you the short version of it, it takes back in France in the swashbuckling era, probably the 1800s or so. And there was an elite group of guards, the musketeers, who served the king. And the king is now in danger. Other people are against the king, and the musketeers have to save the day. And they do. There's the three of them who are in this elite group, and D'Artagnan, who always wants to be part of it. And they have a motto. It's one for all and all for one. If we were writing a book on organizational dynamics right now, they formed a team. They formed a team. All for one and one for all. All of us will serve the good of this one as that one serves us. Friends, in a way, that's our relationship to God. There is but one presence, one power. It doesn't matter what name you call it or how you create it in a picture or in a statue or on the wall in a mural. There is only one. And there is only one family of humankind. And God created humankind, period. Now we could pause for a moment and say, what about life on other planets? And there is a reference in the New Testament where the disciples are speaking to Jesus and they're saying something and he says, well, others hear my voice. And they said, you got others? I thought we were the 12. And he said, I have sheep you know not of. which personally to me means there's folks out there on other planets that probably have two heads, which is definitely better than one, because we haven't done so well with just one. Maybe they have 4 arms. Now, that would be very handy. And I've always thought 2 sets of feet would be great, because then you could wear 2 different pairs of shoes at the same time. See, friends, it's cultivating an attitude of joy and delight in the possibilities in the world. So this one for all and this all for one is the attitude which we need to cultivate. We all serve the one God, and that one God loves each and every single one of us, and every single group, and every single ethnicity, and every single color of skin and expression of culture. Which is why there are 2 more lines in the Indian poet's statement. After we have cultivated friendliness toward the happy, and we've been able to develop compassion for the unhappy, we take delight in the virtuous. We take delight in the virtuous. Virtuous is not a word we hear a whole lot anymore. So I went to the library the other day and looked it up in the hardbound Old English Dictionary. Guess what I found? It's really quite simple. Virtuous means acting with moral rectitude or in conformity with moral law. I like that rectitude. Rectitude always means stand up straight, sit up straight, look forward, pay attention. So it's acting correctly in line with our moral code. Our moral code is very clear. It's given to us first in the Old Testament. I mean, God makes a big show here. This is better than Cecil B. DeMille or anybody else. God comes down with 2 clumps of stone, and on it are incised the guidelines for how we live. First, in our relationship to God, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt have no strange gods before me. Strange had a different meaning back then, friends. Strange meant other than me. All those pagan gods. The first 3 are for that relationship. All the rest are in relationship to our fellow human beings. And once again, we are given that directive by the teacher Jesus, who quotes the first set. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with the whole of your being. And then you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Implication being, first you must love yourself. That can be a bit of a problem. Sometimes on Father's Day we have that problem. Remember the joke I told you at the beginning? God created us in God's image and likeness, and we have returned the compliment by attributing to God our own shortcomings. Well, we would only attribute to God our own shortcomings if we thought we had shortcomings. The first thing we need to remember is we are made in God's image and likeness. We are whole. We are healed. We are good. We are loved. So we take delight in the virtuous. When we see somebody doing something nice is such a cliche, but you know what I mean. We see, for example, a baby who gives his tiny little bear to the baby next to him. Or we see an adult who does something, notices a need in his or her community, and the next thing you know, creates an organization. Or a kid who's only 8 or 9 or 10 and decides to raise money for his friend up the street who needs something and he starts selling lemonade on the street. Or we look at philanthropy today when it is genuinely designed to aid one another. That's the virtuous friend. There is an old concept which we find sometimes in Christianity, very often in Catholicism, and the terms are Latin. It's called the via negativa and the via positiva. The negative way and the positive way. We love learning by the positive way. We love to see good examples. Remember the doctor that wore the red nose? We love to see him. I'm not even going to list the negative examples. Just turn on your TV or open your phone for your newsfeed. Their face, their name is there. We love to learn that way. But friends, the via negativa also offers us an avenue of learning. The avenue is how not to be. When we see somebody behaving badly, and you can fill in the blank for what your picture of looks like behaving badly, what do? We mutter in the sight of God and come out with a string of criticisms. Well, how did their parents raise them? Blah, 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 blah. I always love to remind people, when you got 2 fingers going forward, you got 3 fingers pointing back. We all have the potential to be a twerp instead of being an angel. An angel meaning one who can only do good. So we learn from all that is shown to us. We don't just say, oh, it's a great day, it's sunny. It's a great day, friends, whether it's sunny or it's not sunny, because it is a day on which we have the opportunity to be in the presence of God unfolding the world. So there we are, we're happy with our happy friends. We are compassionate with our sad friends. We take delight in the virtuous. And we create indifference toward the wicked. What does that really mean? Do I need to describe wicked for you? I don't think so. I think we all know what wicked looks like. We know what wicked looks like. It brings tears to our eyes. It makes us sad. It makes us angry. It separates us one from another because we focus on differences instead of our oneness. But here's the question. What is indifference to the wicked? I think it is in the Christian Gospels that we have an illustration of how to respond to that. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it is after Jesus has risen from the dead, come back, is in the company of his disciples, and he's speaking about the world to come. Meaning not the world to come, but the near time to come. He will be gone and they will be leaders. And they get into a tussle about who's going to do what and who's going to get what and who's going to be this and who's going to be that. And they get into a little argument, and Jesus looks at one of the speakers and says, and I love the King James Version because it rhymes, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. What's it to you, Joe? What's it to you, Mary? What's it to you, Sam? What's it to you, Linda? What's it to you, Roz? What's it to you, whoever? On whom have you placed your trust and your willingness to surrender your false impressions of yourself, which lead to false impressions of other people? Indifference Indifference does not include a lack of discernment. It does not include allowing evil to occur and go unpunished, by which I mean evildoers need to be held accountable. But indifference is, hey, it's none of my beeswax, as we used to say. Or there was a wonderful book out entitled years ago, What You Think of Me Is None of My Business. Actually, folks, what I think of other people isn't any of my business either. This is very difficult to do, friends. This is very difficult to do. Because our world today is very polarized. You're either for it or you're against it. That's for sure. It's either black or it's white or it's whatever distinction. It's left or it's right. It's up or it's down. It's good or it's bad. There's no middle ground. Friends, there is only middle ground because the middle ground is the ground of love. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. The rain falls on your petunias, your potato plants, and the crabgrass too. That's God's will. So this part about the second half of the talk title, All for One and One for All, it's humanity, friends, who need to form this team like the Musketeers to do good for the sake of good, to do good for the sake of good for the whole, the allness of us. It's a very interesting section of scripture that I'd like to quote to you. Hardly anybody ever gets into the book of Numbers, but this is really important. This is Numbers 13 and 14. And this is after the Israelites have left Egypt. They finally got out from under Pharaoh. They made it through the Red Sea. They've been wandering around a little bit. And they come to the Holy Land. They come to the Promised Land. And God, verse 1 says, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, send men to scout out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people. Send one man from each of the ancestral tribes. So Moses picks one from each of the 12 tribes, sends them out. You know the scripture, everybody's got a name and the son of and the mother of and all that sort of stuff. I'm skipping that part and I'm moving forward. And when Moses sends him to scout the land, he said, go up there and find out what it looks like. Is it good land? Are the people strong or are they weak? Are the towns fortified, or do you think we can take them easily? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded? Blah, blah, blah. Of course, they're making an assessment. So they went up and they scouted it around, and names that we recognize from Zin to Rehob, etc., from the Negev to the Hebron. And they reached the Wadi Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. I was going to get the grapes out of my fridge this morning, but I decided we didn't need to do show and tell. You know what a bunch of grapes looks like. But friends, these grapes are so huge. They had to build a wooden frame to hang the bunch of grapes on. And in fact, if you go shopping someday, just check out some of the wine bottles. There is a particular brand whose label has that. The grape cluster is so ginormous, as we would say today, they had to carry it on a frame. At the end of 40 days, in other words, enough time to make an assessment, they go back. They go straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole community in the wilderness of Paran, and they make the report. And this is what they tell them. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey. And this, the ginormous bunch of grapes, is the fruit. However, The people who inhabit the country are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites, the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites. In other words, names of tribes of people who live there, and the Canaanites who dwell by the sea. And they're going on and on and on. That's 10 of the scouts. 2 of them, on the other hand, had a different opinion. Caleb hushed the people and said, "But let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome." Friends, they went on to describe it in terms, they said, the people were like giants, and we felt like little crickets. We know what crickets are like, folks. We get them in our garage. And if we're not careful, we end up getting them in the laundry room. And they're sitting there going all night. And you got to find it and get rid of that critter. It's very interesting that the other day I opened a magazine and I found a wonderful article by a psychotherapist named David Furlong, Furlong. And he talked about illuminating the shadow. We all know what the shadow is. The shadow, thanks to Carl Jung, the shadow is that part of ourselves. It's what we call deeply in the subconscious that holds within us the pain, the suffering, the sorrows we've experienced, and that inhibits us. But what Dr. Furlong posited was we also have a positive shadow. A positive shadow that looks and sees with what Unity calls the inner eye, the eye of love, the eye, the senses within. Friends, what we need to do in order to create this loving world is to look around and be honest, as the first 10 were, and went, "Boy, what a mess. What a challenge. Nah, I don't think I'm up for it today. Been there, done that, got that t-shirt, ain't gonna do it again." That's the shadow speaking that says, I just can't go there again. What we need to be is what Caleb and Joshua looked at and went, "Oh my goodness." Who knows? Maybe it was the size of that bunch of grapes. Or maybe they just looked at it and went, "This is fantastic." Friends, what we need to see is the possibility, the potential of a loving world where children do not go to bed hungry at night, where people sit and talk and laugh and have supper together, eat out of the same plate, take bites out of the same piece of bread, where we live and move and have our being and dwell in that consciousness, that undisturbed calmness of mind that we share with one another. This is our big challenge. But we can do this because of our Father, because of the one power, one presence, one essence, one emanation, the one energy in the world that indwells you and me and everyone else, regardless of who they look like, what language they speak, what color their skin is, the texture of their hair, and on and on and on, in all the artificial differences that we seek to find, as opposed to the oneness in God created humankind. So while we are honoring our fathers today, whether they are with us or they have gone, I'll be honoring my father's memory. It's 20 years this year that he is gone. Remember the time he was in the nursing home and he developed some lung issue, and the nurse came in and said, well, we'll just start this treatment. And he looked at her and he said, oh, I do hope this is my time to go home to God. My eyes shot open. And I said, Dad, are you afraid to die? He said, no. I've done the best I can. I'm not afraid. Friends, that's what we need to be now. We need to be brave musketeers, all for one and one for all, and create a loving world.